Welcome to this installment of Business Battleground. In this edition, we're not going to be comparing two different companies, but taking a look at the battleground that's going on inside of HQ Trivia. Like top 10 lists, trivia quizzes have been a staple of culture and communications forever. Online quizzes are nothing new. A decade ago, there was a startup called QuizUp that received funding from Sequoia, the same venture fund that invested in Apple, Google, and many others. QuizUp ended up bursting onto the scene and doing really well, raising $20+ million, but ultimately, it kind of chased every single fad out there at the time, mainly social networking, crashed down to earth, finally selling for less than $10 million. What's a bad investment? QuizUp. In any case, more recently, a couple years ago, there was this new startup that emerged called HQ Trivia. There was this incubator called Intermedia Labs that was started by the same duo who had created Vine. If you recall, Vine was a startup created by Colin Kroll and Russ Yusupov that was ultimately acquired by Twitter. Before long, however, Twitter shut Vine down, and the duo basically set out to recreate their success. Intermedia Labs was actually an incubator that the duo had launched to kind of figure out what their next big hit would be. HQ Trivia burst onto the scene and before long had kind of captured lightning in a bottle with hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of users concurrently answering a set of questions live, altogether twice per day.
It's late 2017, HQ Trivia goes viral, and everyone is ringing alarm bells over trivia. Trivia, it's what we need. It's the thing that publishers and media companies want. But, in my opinion, it's a little bit more magic bean than silver bullet in this situation. Trivia, as fun, as enduring as it is not the thing that everyone is coming to HQ for. I mean, they've got good talent, they've got really good writing, they came at the right moment, but really what I think it is the shared communal experience of it. Everyone is playing together at a time when everyone's normally watching their television shows in different days and different weeks on different platforms. This brings everyone together. And I think the next big breakthrough app will be something that can leverage that quality, that aspect even more.
From a user standpoint, I'd been jumping around from trivia app to trivia app before HQ, but the countdown aspect, the relatively slick production values, the engaging host, and the groupthink aspect of play made HQ stand out to me.
By November of 2017, when the Daily Beast's Taylor Lawrence wrote an article about HQ Trivia, you started to get a sense that this was, at the very least, a very unconventional founder and management team. Russ essentially threatened Taylor to fire their host Scott Rogowsky that had become the face of the app. Even though Scott had become the face of the app, he wasn't necessarily either a full-time employee and definitely was not a shareholder. Now, if Russ was a first-time entrepreneur, you could have chalked up that indiscretion to a lack of experience. But the fact that he would actually go on the record, demand that a journalist read her article to him word by word, and threaten to fire his star host was a sign of things to come.
For me, when I'm playing a trivia game, there's a really fine balancing act when it comes to difficulty level. I don't want to play something that's too hard and I'll never be able to win, but I also want to be challenged on a regular basis. And I think HQ has a really good balance of difficult versus easy so that it's doable, but also challenging.
A mere month later in December, HQ Trivia had started to further take off and get the attention of big investors. But raising funding wasn't a slam dunk. For one, a lot of investors were getting cold feet once they did their due diligence and found out that while at Twitter, Colin Kroll had been the subject of many complaints by then employees who felt that he was essentially acting rather unprofessional. Indeed, he had been fired a mere 18 months after Twitter had acquired Vine. Now you have to put this into perspective. At the time, the Me Too movement had exploded onto the scene, and both in Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and elsewhere, there were more and more reports of inappropriate behavior that was rising to the surface. Allegedly, while Kroll was running Twitter, he had been accused of inappropriate conduct towards female employees. That same Recode article now in December ended up turning off investors once and for all because of Kroll's alleged creepy behavior towards women. At the peak of the Me Too movement, that was the kiss of death to raise financing. Or was it? And if you want a reminder that Silicon Valley is a place unlike any other, despite all the Me Too allegations, a mere few months later, Founders Fund invested $15 million at a $100 million valuation, led by founder partner Cyan Bannister. Founders Fund was known for supporting their founders and not ever pushing them out, something that you could imagine would come back to haunt them. With more financing came greater expectations. By March of 2018, the pressure was on. Can HQ go from a one-app hit wonder to a diversified media company? Exacerbating matters is the fact that HQ Trivia's engagement, downloads, and pretty much every sign of healthy activity had been on a decline. Yusupov himself came out to the defense and said, I quote, "Games are a hits business and don't grow exponentially forever. We're already developing new game formats, one of which we think is really special and complements Trivia nicely."
They do need to diversify, and to be honest, they kind of lost me with HQ Sports and HQ Words, but I think with the right offering, they could have another hit. However, I will say this, if another trivia app came along with a similar or same quality, I could easily be swayed to switch.
Nobody plays the same game forever, apps get stale, and formats risk growing old. So HQ needs to operate like three things at once. They need to be a game designer and publisher who can bring new products forward, support those products throughout their lifespan, and then bring out new products to replace those ones. They need to operate like a tech company who can promote and monetize and support their platform, and like a media company who can produce quality entertainment every day.
Now this is where we need to pause a little bit and discuss Vine and the entrepreneur's mind. Mark Cuban was known for saying that as an entrepreneur you have to choose between the cash and the crown. When you are running your own business, you're king of the domain and essentially get to call the shots. Once you sell your business, you can imagine you're no longer in control, even though sometimes you haven't quite realized that. When Vine was independent, Kroll and Yusupov could do as they pleased. Once it became part of Twitter, they no longer called the shots, and because of the allegations of creepy behavior, they were pushed out. Then once Twitter shut down Vine, you could argue that Kroll and Yusupov probably experienced a little bit of buyer's remorse no matter how much they had cashed out for. In that context, it's highly possible that now with HQ Trivia, they wanted to align themselves with a fund like Founders Fund, who was known for never pushing out the founders. A lot of critics will point out that there was a lot of conflicts of interest that were created when Wall Street and boards allowed an organization's CEO to also serve as its chairman.
But Ash, aren't you the chairman and CEO here?
Ah, yes, you have a point. The difference is when you have outside investors. Now, this may seem like inside baseball, but it's important to note that Founders Fund $15 million investment came on the heels of Lightspeed's $8 million investment previously, but Lightspeed, remaining an investor, probably didn't share the same sensitivity that Founders Fund had with regards to keeping founders around and not kicking them out. And if you tie it back to the buyer's remorse that Russ and Colin likely experienced after selling Vine to Twitter only to see Twitter shut it down, you could imagine and possibly argue that the main reason why HQ Trivia chose Founders Fund wasn't because of valuation or other terms, but just because that they knew that they wouldn't be pushed out, which basically creates an agency problem. Sadly, tragedy strikes. On December 2018, co-founder Colin Kroll was found unconscious in his apartment in New York. Now, we're certainly not here to speculate as to all of the reasons behind the tragedy or what Colin Kroll was thinking at the time, but you can just imagine that when you experience such a success and you're struggling to keep the company headed in the right direction, if you add to that all of the drama that surrounds co-founders fighting, pressures from investors, feeling like you're letting down your user base and your employees, it's ultimately a very, very lethal combination. Now, the problem is when you have a massive hit like HQ Trivia, no matter what you follow it up with, it's just not going to have the same effect. When HQ Words was released, it didn't have the same impact as HQ Trivia did, and that's not to be unexpected.
To have something like HQ come along that has everyone asking for trivia and asking people like me, whose job it is to develop new creative ideas for trivia, is both like, yeah, awesome, this is fun, let's do that. And also really annoying because there's other things at play here other than trivia. You know, like you could have trivia on a paper placemat. You could have trivia, you know, at a trivia night at a bar. You could have trivia on an app. Three completely different experiences, and people are mostly just focusing on trivia. Like, that is the repeatable, scalable thing, when trivia is just an ingredient, it's an excuse, it's a flavor.
Now, we'd already discussed a little bit Russ's odd relationship with the star of HQ Trivia, Scott Rogowsky, and by 2019, Scott was already taking on more and more side projects, even though by and large he was seen as the face and the star of the platform. Spring marks new beginnings, and by then, Scott was already spreading his wings and taking on new projects and mandates. A comedian and performer at heart, I respectfully disagree that what didn't keep him around at HQ Trivia was a lack of options, as TechCrunch suggested. I think ultimately what someone like Scott would have wanted was a lot more liberty and freedom to be able to mix the two. What he had started with HQ Trivia with where his passions lay, be that on stage, doing shows, and of course, baseball. By the time Scott announced that he would be trying to balance hosting the Change-Up Monday to Fridays and hosting HQ Trivia on weekends, it was too little too late. With new hosts already in the fray, Russ announced that Scott was out.
Any trivia show or game show is only as good as its host and its research. And in this case, I think losing a person like Scott Rogowsky is going to hurt the Q. And I can say this because I have hosted a trivia show for the Q. What he does is hard, okay? And he's got the pop culture knowledge, he's got the energy, he's got the innovation, he's got the wit, he's got the timing, and I wonder if this is a hurdle that HQ can recover from.
From a consumer's perspective, tech workers, programmers are interchangeable because you can't see the difference between one programmer's code and another, as long as, they're good programmers. But in entertainment, who's in front of the camera makes all the difference. Sometimes it's the most important thing, and it does not scale easily.
The company and its employees were airing their dirty laundry in public, which is never a good sign. TechCrunch also reported that half of the company had basically drafted a letter complaining to the board, asking them to remove Russ, but instead, Russ turned around, went all Lex Luthor on them, and fired them all. Now, a few disclosures here. Yes, WatchMojo has dabbled in trivia, and yes, WatchMojo did a test with a company called The Q, which could be seen absolutely as a competitor to HQ Trivia and their parent Intermedia Labs. Another disclosure, admittedly, around the time that all this drama was going on, I did reach out to members of the board to pick their brains and see what they were thinking about a solution that would be maybe a bit more elegant for all stakeholders, including not just shareholders and management, but mainly employees and the user base. So I think the bigger takeaway for Silicon Valley is this myth of the genius coder, developer, and engineer that we entrust with millions and millions of dollars and assume they have the maturity, professionalism, integrity, and character to not just serve their own needs or their investors' needs, but also those of their user base, clients, and mainly employees. The jury's out, and time will tell if HQ Trivia will become one of those iconic brands that came out of the gates, had a few missteps, and then had its greatest successes later on, or if it'll fizzle out kind of like QuizUp.